two of dedicated work is all it'll take. She wasn't as far back as she thought she was, just missing a few fundamental things. Lily brushed the concern off with a flick of her wrist, the cuff on her jacket snapping lightly as she did it. Fair enough. Still, thanks. I know Eva appreciates it as well. You put any thought into what you want? I did say I'd spoil you. Not yet. Honestly, I have everything I want right now. I'm sure I'll think something up. Lily sighed and crossed her arms in front of her. They're stalling because they weren't expecting me here, Andrea in the lobby, or Kit staring through people's heads. Unsurprising, I suppose. She really does stare through people's heads, though. I don't think she's used to directing her talent yet. Maybe we should... The door across the way clicked open, and a group of well-dressed men and women began filing into the room. Felix vaguely recognized some of them from previous meetings, but there were of course several new faces. "Sorry for keeping you waiting, Mr. Campbell," said a smartly dressed young woman, taking the center seat. She was in her late 20s, brown hair, blue eyes, attractive, put together on the slimmer side, with a perfectly straight smile. "That's all right. We're billing you accordingly," Lily said with a bright grin in return. "As this was an emergency meeting and fell outside of expected contracted calendar dates, you'll be taking the bill for everything. I don't think you'll like my rates, especially when we factor in the costs of bodyguards and personnel." "I see." The woman's face had clouded at that. "My name is Lauren Aston. We'll try to keep this brief. We'll be halting all payments made to you as a landlord until you are able to pay off the outstanding debt." Felix raised his eyebrows at that and opened his mouth to ask a question. Lily lifted a well-manicured hand and held up a finger, her face tilting to the side a fraction to catch his eyes with her own. Nodding his head, Felix closed his mouth. "Is that all?" Lily asked. We'll also be unable to process any other agenda items until it's taken care of, as you're still in breach of contract," finished Miss Aston. "According to my notes," Lily started, opening her satchel and flipping through a series of papers. "The debt owed is $150,000? "That's right. I'm afraid with that substantial amount of money owed, we really would need it taken care of first." Weird. Wouldn't they assume I could just use the landlord back pay to crush the debt? Do they know I already spent it all? Do they think me broke because I opened a business? "And who has deemed that this is the correct course of action?" Lily asked, picking up her pen and moving it over to her ledger. That is, we had a majority vote." "That's fine. I'll need the names of who voted in favor of this action, though. I'm afraid your voting process isn't sealed," Lily said, smiling with her teeth. As if to emphasize her point, she tapped the pen twice to her paper. Miss Aston paused and looked to her left and right. "Here, I'll make it simple. Who voted in favor of this action? Please raise your hand. If you don't have a majority, we can give you the bill for this meeting and leave." Lily curled an errant lock of hair behind one ear and waited, moving her eyes from one person to the next. Slowly, 5 hands raised into the air. Lily made a point of reading the nameplate of each individual, which they had so graciously provided in their self-important routine, and writing it down. "You can't dismiss anyone, as you're in breach," Miss Aston said, leaning forward over her section of the table. Lily sighed and pulled out a checkbook. Filling out a check quickly and neatly, she set it down in front of Felix. "Sign here," she indicated the signature line. Felix accepted the pen, signed his name, and slid it back to Lily. "Here is your payment. When will you have the 5% for the landlord available?" Lily asked. With a quick motion, she popped the check clear of the book and set it down on the desk. Tomorrow, as per our regulations." Miss Aston no longer seemed so sure of herself. "Great. As this is a new quarter, we move to dismiss 2 people. We'll also be filing a complaint that we find the recent hiring practices to be unsatisfactory. As to who's dismissed..." Lily tapped her chin with a finger, and then leaned back in her chair, looking to Felix. "Any thoughts? If nothing else, Miss Aston is pretty enough to keep around for fun. I mean, she's not me, but you can't always stare at me. Even I'll get self-conscious after a while." Miss Aston made a shocked noise, while the four who had raised their hands with her looked everywhere in the room except to them. Felix smirked and shook his head, letting out a slow breath. I ever mention you're fantastic, Lily? Several times. Don't stop. I'll leave it to you, Lily. I trust you. Felix didn't want any part in her power game right now. Instead, he pulled out his phone and updated Kit in a text message. Music to my ears. Great. You two are gone. Thanks. Now, Miss Aston, I do hope you'll be working for our interests here in the future. I'd hate to see you lose your job over it. We'll leave our bill with the receptionist, as well as our formal complaint. I made sure to have it notarized. Can't have it go missing, now can we? Lily stood up from her chair, closing her satchel. Felix got up as well, pocketing his phone. Nothing more was said as they left. Lily was as good as her word and left both the complaint and bill at the front desk. Felix adjusted his pants as they left the building. For whatever reason, he could never get his dress pants to sit quite right. Stopping just outside, he reached down and pulled at the sides of his pants. I swear to God, maybe we should hire a tailor. Felicia's great, but I think I'm abnormal and need a master tailor or something, Felix muttered. All around him, a sudden and blinding bright white light encircled him. A group of others plowed into him and hustled him forward before he had a chance to even contemplate it. What the fuck? He was forced headfirst into the car. He ended up being smashed up against Lily with Andrea just about clambering on top of him. He caught a glimpse of Kit in the passenger seat before the convoy took off. That was a sniper. Had to be miles and miles out. Didn't even hear the sound, Andrea said, still pressing into him. In turn, pressing him into Lily. The sorceress looked at him, his head wedged into her shoulder and chest. She gave him a weak smile and averted her eyes. The force on the shield was significant. Whatever they shot, it was a very heavy round, Lily said, adjusting her position without looking at Felix. Andrea eased up off him as they blew through a red light and across into a section of street with taller buildings. Sorry, Lily, Felix said as he sat up. He tried to do it without pawing the woman unnecessarily. Better to be manhandled by you than dying. Property, like slaves, goes into a limbo state if the owner dies. Your health is important, Lily explained, her voice soft. She picked something off her skirt and then crossed her legs. Oh, did that tire you out? Here, you can lean on me, dear, Andrea said delightedly. Grabbing him around the shoulders, she pulled him into her side and chest, holding to him tightly. Felix growled, putting his hands to her to push away, only to have her pull his head to her chest and then lightly comb her fingers through his hair. There, dear. We're all here for you. All you had to do was ask. Felix closed his eyes before he could see Kit or Lily gloating at him. They seemed to delight in the fact that Andrea did as Andrea pleased, much to his eternal dismay. Whatever. Now they're using snipers to take me out. Yes, they were outside of my range, Kit said from up front. I didn't see the shot, Andrea said, her fingernails grazing along his scalp. Nor I. It only confirms what we knew. They're out there, and very determined. Nothing has changed, except that we now know some of those poor excuses for lawyers are involved. Lily said, with a click of her tongue. What? Felix asked, cracking an eye open to look to Lily. The soul-eating lawyer met his eyes and held up her hands in a gesture of futility. A sniper was prepared for your exit, with a perfect shot, and at an extreme distance. The whole thing was a setup. Oh. Shit. Things had calmed down since the shooting. Everything was finally back to normal. Or at least as normal as it could be when you were the head of a corporation boasting some of the strongest supers the world had ever seen. Felix was on antique duty today. There'd been a large number of scheduled private evaluations while he'd been incapacitated. Since coming back into the store, he'd given the superpower of item identification, by touch, to several people. Having it triggered by touch had kept the point cost much further down than by sight. It also meant that the other stores, and the auto shop, would be outfitted to have someone always on hand to get things cataloged, which left Felix at HQ doing his own part. Sitting in what used to be the storefront in the warehouse, he awaited the next client. They'd be searched, brought in, and dropped off here with their item. Today had been a very good day. Several high-end acquisitions had been made that had turned their fortunes around quickly, After all the cash outlays recently, their bank account was looking rather skinny. Broken antiques, purchased at a higher price, repaired, and then sold, made everyone happy. Most especially the people who sold those broken antiques for more than the value of it. A man entered the room. He spent some time looking around at the various items dispersed throughout the office as decoration. "Good morning," Felix said, standing up from behind his desk. The man jumped, and his head whipped around to lock on to Felix. Good morning. What can I do for you today, Mr.?" Felix held out his hand across the table good-naturedly. The man took Felix's hand in a firm shake, and then took a seat. "Mr. White, I'm, here to sell this." Mr. White pulled out a legal-sized sketchbook with drawstring ties. "Oh? And what do you believe it is?" He'd learned that asking this question was the best way to determine the intent. "It's a sketchbook. My father bought it from a collector. The man claimed it was worth a couple $100 at the time. It's filled with sketches from artists from the 20s and 30s, with a couple of knockoffs as well." Mr. White said it humbly and without any emotion behind it. It was a sale to be made to him, nothing more. He needs money and doesn't really care that much about the item at all. Flipping open the sketchbook, Felix began to sort through them one by one. They matched exactly what the man said. Sketch after sketch, he flipped through and checked. $50 here, $100 there, $10 for the next one. Right up until Felix flipped it open onto a sketch that was very out of place. It had the look of something religious, yet drawn in an older style. One that looked similar to the Renaissance era. Name: Michelangelo de Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni sketch. Created in 1502. Appraised value: $32. Created by Michelangelo de Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni. Actual value: $4,500,000. Condition: moderately worn. Asking price: $200. Durability: 69 out of 100. Mint price: $22 million. Cost to repair: 200 points. "That's one of the imitations. Supposedly it's meant to look like Michelangelo. The attribution is missing since the corner it'd be in was torn off. It's well drawn, but without that attribution, there's no telling if it was a master or someone who liked his work." Felix cleared his throat and delicately withdrew the sketch and set it aside. "Just buy it, just buy it, just buy it, just..." "Why do you need the money?" Felix asked quietly, folding one hand into the other and meeting Mr. White's eyes. "I don't see why that matters. Can't you just buy it and..." "My son was apprenticed to some superhero. He doesn't even have powers, he just wanted to help. Damn cops got him the other day when the hero he was working for left him behind." The man shrugged his shoulders and slumped low in his seat. "I need to get the money together to buy my son. He's my only son. I've been out of work for a while now, living off my savings. Now this happens and They said it'd cost a significant amount of money to buy him, because of his apprenticeship. Doesn't matter if he doesn't know anything. Everyone will assume he does. And right now, the bounty on heroes has skyrocketed." Felix could only nod his head. It had indeed. Apparently there were some heroes still working in the city, and in the last day or two, the bounty had jumped into the millions. Yeah, his son is going to be expensive. Not my problem, though. Nodding his head, Felix pulled over the bill of sale and started to write it in for $1,000. It was more than generous on his part. Felix stopped in mid-pen stroke and looked at the pen he was using. It was something Eva had given him. It was a rough cast steel pen that had been engraved by Eva's hand. His name was front and center on the barrel of the pen, taking up a sizable space. All around his name were engraved simple words: Defender, Valiant, Fearless, Preserver, Vigilant, Guardian. On and on it went, the pen completely filled with those silly words formed from a childlike innocence. She'd spent hours trying to get the engraving just right. She had given it to him in a little box and everything.
"Your weapon is a pin.
Here's one for me, then, she'd said at the time. Smothering the stupid sentiment welling up in himself, he set the pen down and pressed his hands to his face. She'd hate me. Felix shuddered at the thought of Eva staring at him after finding out about the sketch, especially if she got the full story. This actually is a Michelangelo sketch. It isn't an imitation. It's legit. In its current condition, it'd probably be worth $4 million if you could get professional attribution, Felix said between his fingers. His energy leaked out of him as he spoke, slowly hunching over the desk. I can certify it with my own name, but I wouldn't be able to buy it from you, nor would it honestly get the full worth from it. I can put you in touch with the name of a contact I have who deals in some of the slave auctions. He could probably arrange something for you, though I doubt you'd get the full amount from the sketch. Really? Mr. White leapt to his feet, the chair clattering to the floor and scraping along the ground. That'd be great. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Uh-huh, Felix said without emotion. Setting his hands back to the table, he picked up Eva's pen. Staring at it for a second, he looked back to the sheet of paper and wrote it out as an evaluation rather than a sale. That'll be $100 for the valuation, Felix said, sliding the sheet of paper across to the excited man. Mr. White gathered up the sketchbook and then looked at the valuation. I don't have it. I'm sorry. What little money I had, I spent on getting an invite to the auction that my son is being sold at. I don't have a job. Felix groaned and scratched at his head. All right. What exactly do you do for a career? Mr. White paused. His words were cautious, uncertain. I was the lead engineer on several projects for the Superhero Association. When the government changed over, I escaped and never looked back. Felix's attention changed from the sketch to Mr. White. What kind of projects? Nanotechnology, energy weapons, and renewable energy. They're all kinda interconnected, Mr. White said with a small smile. Ha. Ha 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 ha. Seriously? Mr. White, how about you sit back down? I'll cancel my upcoming appointments, have lunch brought in, and let's have a talk. Felix turned his head to the dark corner he knew Miyu would be in. Miyu, could you coordinate with some of the others to get things arranged? I'll also need Kit in here. I want to see where she ended up with the indentured package. I'm going to make Mr. White a job offer here, and I want to make sure we have an appropriate contract that we can put together. What do you mean, you're going to make a job offer? How can you offer me a job? This is a pawn shop, isn't it? Why would you need an engineer? Mr. White's voice sped up as he asked each successive question. Miyu materialized out of the shadowed corner and lifted a hand to her ear. Shadow to Pancake, Miyu said between gritted teeth. Pancake here, came Andrea's shouted response, which Felix could hear through Miyu's earpiece even from where he was sitting. Miyu flinched at the sudden response and shook her head angrily. Probably shouldn't have let everyone make their own call signs. Your own fault there, Miyu. Chapter 20. Free lunch. Felix sat down with his tray in the first dormitory floor's dining hall. Managing to surprise him, Felicia had built it to accommodate everyone on the floor and two below. Everyone in Legion fit into this single dining hall. Felicia already had teams of Andreas excavating down, building out several more of these dining halls and attached dormitories, and every other type of room that they'd need. Lunch today was actually rather good. Lasagna, garlic bread, and some type of vegetable medley. After eating in the dining hall a few times, he realized he didn't care at all what his food costs were. Whoever their cook was, they were a master, and Felix would ply them with whatever ingredients they asked for. Andrea dropped down beside him and immediately smashed her right side up into his left. Andrea, I can't really eat like this, Felix said, his left arm forced out behind her back. I'll feed you then. Say she said, holding up a forkful of lasagna. Andrea, I don't... His words were lost in the mouthful of food that she stubbornly forced on him. Growling, he looked ahead as Lily sat down in front of him. She was dressed as she always was, beautiful and professional. Kit took the seat on his right, making a happy cooing noise over the food. She loved eating. Lily had apparently seen what had happened and daintily scooped up a chunk of lasagna on her fork and then held it out towards him. A perfectly pretty and evil smile turned her lips, and she raised her eyebrows at him. "Don't leave a lady waiting, Felix. If she's allowed to feed you, I believe I am too." Felix found himself getting annoyed and pointed his fork at her. "Oh? You want to feed me? Certainly, certainly." Lily laid her fork down and then opened her mouth wide at him. Her tongue slowly moved up and touched her incisors and glided across. Felix looked to his right, his cheeks heating up. Kit was watching him from that side as well. Her own smile was less predatory, though full of mirth. "You do realize she gets a rise out of it. She, and I know this, gets off on the fact that you refuse her. That whenever you even get close to flirting or hitting on her, you run," Kit explained, as if talking to a child. She ate a bite of her own lunch and then pointed back to Lily with the empty fork. Felix slowly turned his eyes back to the soul-eating lawyer. She'd returned to her meal, her cheeks a faint red. She's not wrong, is she? Lily was always the one being chased by suitors, police, and supers alike. Didn't mean he wanted to mess with Lily right now. She'd give him twice as bad later than any he gave her now. Kit, though. Kit he could harass. Looking to Kit, he swallowed and then gave her a grin. "As if you're any better. You prodded me to figure out my reaction so you can try and predict what I'm thinking. Since you can't read me. Should I share those thoughts with you? Should I tell you about what went through my head when I was putting you back together? Piece by piece? When I saw you for everything you were? Ha! Two can play that game." Kit immediately turned a bright, fuming red and turned her face forward. Her left hand came up to shield herself from his sight. "Was that when she was all broken and meat and stuff? Ioana told me about that. That you were like corpses and you brought them back from death." As soon as Felix turned his head to answer Andrea's question, she shoved her fork into his mouth again. Grunting, he started chewing the mouthful and glared at Andrea, who only smiled at him, tilting her head slowly forward to peek up at him from below. Her mismatched eyes peered at him through her blonde bangs. "You could take me apart and put me back together in whatever way you see fit. Or a few of me, if you like," she whispered in a promising voice. Felix stopped chewing entirely and stared at the young woman. She still made it a point to sleep in his bed every night, sometimes at his feet, sometimes on him, beside him, or even on the floor. That arrangement took on a whole new meaning with that one statement. Andrea was definitely attractive, especially when she got coy or energetic. That girl next door charm of hers changed in a heartbeat when she tried. "How was that? It was embarrassing, but I did it. Did it work?" Andrea asked, turning her head to Lily. "Did I melt his boxers? Will he want to sleep closer tonight?" Lily choked on her food and pressed a napkin to her mouth. Felix turned a wide-eyed glare on Lily, who was hiding behind her napkin. "Felix, the indentured servant program is going well," Kit interrupted. "We've had a number of people ask for their families to be put into the program." Kit fingered a paper out of her messenger bag at her side and laid it down in front of him. Felix slowly turned his glare from Lily to the paper. It was a balance sheet on costs and return on investment based on pay and job title. They were well in the black. Beyond in the black. The pawn shops were making money, but the estimated costs of the work everyone else was doing was all in savings. And it was a lot. All the children are being enrolled immediately, after an evaluation and tutors if they need it. The school seems to be enjoying the influx of children. The empty desks are filling up, and their tuition is filling their account. It doesn't hurt that we converted all that debt into ownership and controlling shares. That little bit of business had soothed Felix's ire. The debt was wiped out, and instead they now owned a majority of the school. An 80% controlling share, no less. Felix nodded his head, following along. "We never did find out what auction Mr. White's son went to, but I'm happy to report they both turned up this morning. Mr. White is already in his lab at work. His son is training with Ioana." "Pity. We could use more people. I think the auctions will become more and more scarce as time goes on," Felix said. He moved the sheet of paper back to Kit. Andrea shoved another forkful of food into his mouth. He felt the beastkin's tail swish back and forth against his back. Sighing through his nose, he gave up. Picking up his plate of lasagna, he set it into Andrea's tray and then pointed at her own mouth.
For me? Goody. I'll feed you mine and eat yours. Being your personal secretary is great. It's kind of like when people date in movies. That reminds me.
Before he could figure out what the wolf girl was doing, she handed her personal tablet to Lily and then grabbed Felix's face. With quick, agile fingers, she rearranged his hair, brushed something off his cheek, and then forced him to look forward.
Smile,
Andrea said, pressing into his side. Felix did as instructed and smiled at Lily, not quite following along.
Great! Get ready, Lily,
Andrea commanded. Andrea's fingers snatched his chin and turned his face towards her own. Then she kissed him wetly on the corner of his mouth, pressing herself right up into his shoulder. Pulling back from him and giggling insanely, she made grabby hands at Lily. With a smirk, Lily handed the tablet over to her.
I expect you to return the favor. Of course, of course. Just let me know when and I'll get the others involved.
Andrea promised as she began flipping through what looked like photos of him and her that were just taken. What in the actual fuck did Felix started?
Oh, Felix? Dimitri left a message for you about 30 minutes ago. He'd like to arrange a call to discuss his first favor with you.
Kit interrupted him. Again. His thoughts derailed at that, his anger instantly cooling. Turning his head to Kit, he lifted his right hand in a questioning gesture. He did? All right. Let's set up a call or a meet for an hour or two from now. After this, I'm supposed to let Ioana and me kick my ass for a while. Then another forkful of lasagna was jammed into his mouth. He lifted his hand towards Andrea. Halfway there, he found Lily smiling at him with an empty fork, still in front of him.
Eat up, darling,
said the demoness in her best impression of Andrea's voice from earlier. Her eyes were teasing and warm, her smile hungry.
Oh, you have a little something there, dear,
Andrea said, getting in front of him. She grabbed his face, licked her fingers, and began wiping at his face with them. All around him, his people watched. They were watching. Felix began shuddering in absolute rage as Andrea patted his cheek. Flopping into the chair, Felix watched Miyu cross the room and take up residence in a corner. Two others took the door, while Andrea Prime was practically in his pocket. She was working on something on her tablet but stayed glued to him. Tapping the screen on his desk, he pulled up Dimitri's number and hit the send button. The phone connected on the first ring.
Felix, glad you could get back to me so fast. I need to call in one of those favors.
Good to hear from you, Dimitri. And yeah, that'd be part of the agreement. What can I do for you?
I think I have an infestation, and I could use an exterminator. Make sure you bring your mind reader to find the rats. Say, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, my place.
I'll be there, Felix said. There was no response to that, since the line had already gone dead. How did he know about Kit?
Rats? I hate rats. I had to deal with them a lot when dealing with targets who were in not nice places.
Andrea grumped unhappily. Felix closed out his program and slapped the desktop display. I think he means informants. People who work for the cops, not actual rats, he explained to the Beast Girl.
Oh, that makes sense.
She poked at something on her screen, and then bounced up and down twice.
There!
She flipped her tablet around and showed it to him. It was the background of her tablet, a picture of them smiling into the camera. One of those that had been taken earlier that day. She tapped the desktop, and it switched to the picture of her kissing him. She tapped the screen again, and it was another photo of them together, but this time in the car. Then it was a picture of a number of Andreas sleeping next to him in his bed, though on him might have been more accurate. One was spread across his lower legs, another next to him had a leg thrown over his stomach and hips, and a third had wrapped herself up around an arm. A fourth one was above him, sleeping lengthwise across the pillows with an arm over his face. Sleep hadn't been as refreshing as it used to be. That change certainly lined up with after she'd weaseled that concession out of him. Now he knew why. Andrea, how many pictures like this do you have? Felix asked, looking over the top of the tablet. She gave him a grin and leaned forward towards him.
A lot.
I see. And you didn't give these to anyone, did you?
No, of course not.
Good.
Just Lily, Kid, and Miyu.
Felix felt his face screw up in a grimace at that.
They're all well taken,
Miyu promised from behind him. His intercom beeped once, then came to life.
Mr. Campbell, I have a...
There was a pause as an other questioned whoever it was for their name.
John Smith here to see you. He says he's here from the Department of Slave Affairs.
Thinking, Felix tilted his head down, staring at the ground. Reaching up, he thumbed the intercom button. I'll meet him in the gold conference room. Please have Kit and Lily notified. Andrea Prime stood upright beside him and began tapping things into her tablet. I should be there in... Felix paused as Andrea caught his eyes. She held up one hand with all 5 fingers splayed, closed her hand, and did it again. 10 minutes, Felix finished. Andrea Prime nodded her head and turned back to her tablet.
Consider it done, Mr. Campbell.
It had taken some serious work to get Andrea to be able, or at least willing, to call him Mr. Campbell when she used an other to man the front desk. In the end, it was Lily who had managed to get her to do it. Now that he thought about it, those two were thick as thieves as of late.
I have a couple others preparing a suit for you. A squad of guard others are setting up in gold. Miyu, I've taken the liberty of alerting your people of the situation.
Andrea looked up from her tablet, waiting for a response from either of them. Good work, Felix and Miyu said in unison. 10 minutes later to the second, Felix sat himself down in the conference room named the Gold. Lily sat to his right, Kit on his left, Miyu a half step behind him. There was also an other in each corner, armed with SMGs. The poorly named John Smith walked into the room, took a look around, then held up his hands. He looked to be in his early 30s, brown hair, blue eyes, nondescript, neither tall nor short, overweight or skinny. One of the others immediately moved in and frisked him roughly and thoroughly. She pulled out a handgun from a shoulder holster underneath Smith's jacket. Opening the door, she handed the weapon to someone else and continued with her search.
Wearing a wire, nothing else.
The other reported, moving back to her corner. A little paranoid, Mr. Campbell? Mr. Smith asked, dropping his hands to the side. I am indeed. You may want to turn off your electronics. Maybe put them on the table, even. I'd hate for all the electronics on your person to go dead. This building tends to eat electronics at times. My people constantly complain about it, Felix said in a flat tone. Mr. Smith looked up to the corners of the room, finding himself on 2 different cameras. Uh-huh. Taking out what appeared to be a phone with an attached cord that came up through his sleeve, Smith set it on the table. Then he pulled out a second device as well. He deliberately showed both being powered off, then pushed them to the middle of the table. What can I do for you today, Mr. Smith? Felix asked. As I said to your receptionist, I'm an agent for the newly formed Department of Slave Affairs. Pulling out an identification card, he flipped it open and held it out to Felix. It read literally as he described. Slave Affairs, John Smith. Investigator, Field Agent. I'm here as your registered slave owner. Specifically, a major holder. We're reaching out to those with a large interest in slaves to discuss changes we'll be implementing. I'm listening. Glad to hear that, Mr. Campbell. Specifically, there is going to be a tax on all income generated by a slave equal to 4% of the value. This went live last month, and this will be the first month that it'll come due for payment. Lily was taking notes into a holographic projection from her tablet. Kit was staring through the man's head. The others behind Mr. Smith had their weapons trained on the man's back. Message received. Anything else? Felix asked. He didn't care, nor did he really want to deal with this right now. Mr. Smith blinked at the casual acceptance and dismissal. Next year, the loophole caused by paying your own slaves will be eliminated. I understand. Anything else? Felix repeated once more. Mr. Smith smirked and then gestured at everyone around Felix. Could we perhaps speak alone for 2 minutes? That's all the time I need. Felix sighed and then nodded his head. Lily had already spelled a shield around him. It would remain regardless of where she was. He was as safe as he could be already. Fine. 2 minutes. Everyone, please clear the room. Make sure the recordings are paused. As one, they closed up their workstations, tablets, and messenger bags, packed up, and left. The last one out the door was Miu, who he imagined was probably now standing on the other side of the door, waiting. "You've built quite a harem," Mr. Smith said, smiling at Felix. "What was it you wanted to discuss?" Felix had other things he had to take care of today, and his calendar was booked. After this, he was due to sit down and go over possible upgrades for the building. "We both know there's a multitude of loopholes right now with the slave system. Our beloved leader made it legal, but didn't invest any time in its infrastructure. The system, taxes, anything really. What'd be illegal elsewhere isn't so at all here." Leaning forward, Felix spread his hands out in front of him. And I'd love to spend some time with your ladies. You let me stop by twice a month for an hour or so, and I'll make sure those taxes you owe disappear. As if you've paid them already. I'd prefer either of the two who are sitting next to you, but I could go feral on that dog girl," Mr. Smith said. "Huh?" Felix had to concentrate for a second to realize Mr. Smith was suggesting he use Lily and Kit as payment in lieu of taxes. "She's a wolf. And no thanks, I'll pass. Unless there's something else, I believe that we can conclude this meeting." Standing up from his side of the table, Felix gestured to the two devices. Mr. Smith smirked at Felix and then got up. He pocketed the devices and then paused. "See you real soon, Mr. Campbell. My offer remains open. You know, in case something changes and you need help." Turning his back to him, Mr. Smith left the conference room. Immediately, Kit, Lily, Andrea, Miu, and the others came back inside. "Well, now that we know about it, we can set aside taxes for it. Sounds like we need to have yet another finance meeting." Lily watched him curiously. No doubt she wants to know what happened after they left. "Yes, we probably should. We're in some trouble, but nothing we can't work ourselves out of with proper budgeting of both our finances and your points." "Great. Let's just do it here. We should probably get lunch sent up." Felix sat back down with a sigh. Almost as if they had been waiting for that statement, a crew of others came in and began serving pancakes and fruit juice. Andrea immediately sat herself down on his left side and pulled his plate in front of herself. Several of the cook others crowded around him, watching. Felix knew where this was going. He closed his eyes with a groan, pressing his face to his hands.
Say,
Andrea Prime said from his left. Chapter 21. Point of View. Felicia slapped a hand against the dark black metal. A solid thud came back. It was surprising. "It looks like medieval armor," Felix said, tapping a finger against the chest plate.
"Oh, aye. It is, really. It's what we could whip up on the fly. It'll stop everything up to a 50 caliber sniper rifle."
The dwarf seemed proud as she hooked her thumbs into the clasps of her overalls.
"This'll keep you safe from most things. We're working on other things, of course. Better things. This'll do for today, though."
To be fair, metal armor that looked this thin stopping a high-powered rifle round was impressive.
Better than even full body armor. No loss of movement, and the weight is minimal. Certainly ain't fashionable, but that's not the point.
Felicia reached up and pinged the helmet. Fashionable? No. Not at all. All right. And you've tested this? Felix asked. Picking up the helmet, he set it to one side and then drew out the chest piece.
Andrea shoved the material up quite a bit. No penetration,
Felicia explained. Great. Good work, Felicia. You and your team are phenomenal.
Thanks. It's nice to work without limits.
She picked up the gauntlets and handed them to Kit.
"He's your boy. You dress him. I'm leaving before I have to say anything I don't want to."
Felicia trundled out of the room, Ioana following her with her eyes. Go, Ioana. I already have enough people watching me. Ioana nodded at Felix's statement and followed the dwarf out.
"They're interested in each other. They just haven't taken that first step yet,"
Kit said, running a finger over one of the arm guards.
"It's cute."
Felix grunted and inspected the armor. Smooth, sleek, and made with elegant lines, it had the appearance of modern tech. It clearly couldn't be anything else but a suit of armor, though. Made of interlocking plates, it was bound and secured against the black padding that it was mounted on. Yes, I should put it on. We're supposed to meet Dimitri in an hour. Andrea clapped her hands together and others started to leap out of her. When 6 others were standing behind Andrea Prime, she lifted one hand above her head.
Get him!
Felix was brought down under a flurry of hands trying to undress him so they could stuff him into his new armor. Kit stood on his right. Spread out in a semicircle behind him were many, many others. Ioana, Miu, and Lily had to remain to keep the whole business running, but also defend it. To that end, those 3, plus Kit and Andrea, were all boosted at 300% of their power. Remind me to go through the upgrades when we're done here. I keep putting it off.
Sure thing, dear.
Andrea Prime said happily from beside him. She was dressed in a jacket, blouse, and pencil skirt that she'd taken as her uniform. Tapping something into her tablet, she shifted her weight back and forth. In sharp contrast to that, every Andrea around in the area was on sharp-eyed vigilance. They were all decked out in pantsuits, ballistic vests, and SMGs under their jackets. He'd managed to convince her to buy a mass of the vests and hand them out to her others. At long last, the door to the restaurant opened. Dimitri stood there, staring at Felix in his suit of armor.
Felix?
Dimitri asked slowly. Yep. Sorry. Going out in public has been a problem as of late. Can we come in? Dimitri nodded his head, and then stepped aside, holding the door open for them. He'd kept them waiting for 20-some odd minutes.
I apologize for the delay. There was some dispute about people being excused from this test.
Felix waved a gauntleted hand at him. No worries, no worries. Andrea, spread out and cordon off the building. Only bring a few in with you. We should be safe here, Felix said, turning his head to Andrea Prime as he passed Dimitri.
Yes, dear.
Andrea stopped and looked towards her others, who all looked to her. In an instant, they split up without any form of communication. Once again, Felix had to wonder how they managed that. Was it a psychic link, or something else? 2 others, Andrea, Kit, and himself, were led into the basement. The last time they'd stepped foot here, they'd been on a mission of death and destruction. This time, it was a favor. Hopefully, there isn't a body count this time. Dimitri opened a door that hadn't been there the last time they had come through. Inside was a large number of men and women sitting in chairs, standing around, and generally just waiting. There was even a number of people hog-tied and laid out along one wall.
It's like that horror movie we watched the other day. You're not going to wear one of their faces like a mask, are you?
Andrea asked, looking at Dimitri.
No. You can start with whoever.
Dimitri flipped a hand at the people in the room. Felix had expected it, to a degree. This wouldn't do at all. It would reveal far too much about Kit's abilities. Do you have a room we can work out of? One-on-one interviews will get us the best results, Felix asked, turning his head to the Prime Boss.
Yeah, we can do that. Over there. It's an office that isn't being used.
Andrea pointed at one of the others, who took off at a jog to inspect the room. After half a minute, she waved them on. Felix took a chair in the corner and pulled off his helmet. Then he gestured to the chair behind the desk. All yours, Madam Interrogator.
Thank you. Thank you for both getting us out of that room and the seat. I didn't really want to interview them in that room with everyone watching.
Kit sat down, adjusting her dress and blouse with a few gentle tugs. Stop. You look great.
Really?
Kit asked, looking up at Felix. Of course. Now get ready. Dimitri will probably start sending people in.
The room is clean. No one listening or watching,
one of the others said. Only a second or two later, 2 men brought in a bound and struggling third man and dropped him in the chair in front of the desk. Him first! Without another word, the 2 men left, closing the door behind them. Kit smiled and flipped open a pad of paper and met the man's eyes.
Let's begin.
To Felix, it was interesting. He imagined she probably had all the answers she needed within seconds of meeting the man. Yet she spent time asking him questions, prodding at his answers, and generally conducting what felt like a police interview. After a while, though, he noticed that her questions weren't linear. They tended to flow from the last question, all right, but in a strange direction. almost as if she was reading a thought and asked a question to clarify his answer, and read his mind at the same time. After 5 minutes and most of his responses being one-word answers, Kit had the two others drag him out.
Not a cop. Steals a lot, though. Has gone informant on a few people in the organization he didn't like, but not on the organization itself,
Kit said, jotting something down. Oh, did you know that right up front, or? Felix asked, as the door closed behind the others.
I knew most of it up front. The questions helped focus their mind on the thoughts I want. I couldn't read Smith very well the other day. He kept his thoughts close. I'd almost suspect him of having a minor-level telepath skill. This interview was easy in comparison. Certainly a lot easier since he upgraded me. Still weird to say that.
Felix made a soft noise and settled into his chair. After a few minutes, the others dragged in the next person. 20-some-odd interviews later, Kit changed her approach. It was subtle. She almost missed it. She didn't write anything as the others escorted a young man to the chair. Every other time, she'd already been writing as they brought the subject in. The man looked scrappy, his face sporting. He seemed much like everyone else they'd interviewed, built in a physical manner and clearly well-suited to being part of a crime syndicate. When the door shut, Kit laid her pen down on the paper.
Pretty impressive. Going off a deep cover that long without being caught,
Kit said in a complimentary fashion. The two others in the corners pulled out their weapons and threw these on the man in the chair. Looking from one gun to the other, the man deflated in his chair, his hands resting on his knees. That easy, huh? He said softly.
That easy. 6 years is a long time to be a deep cover cop.
Doesn't matter, though. Does it? Not really. Don't blame her, though. She's here because of me. But watch your tongue or I'll have one of the others pull it out. That or we take you back home and put you in the sausage machine. Right after Mad gives a shot at you, Felix said, leaning forward, suddenly eager. Sausage machine. Yeah. First we give you the Mab, she eats your soul. Then we put your living body in this machine. It turns you into sausage that empowers people who eat it. Haven't tried it myself, but quite a few of my people swear it's tasty.
It's gamey,
Andrea said from beside him.
Didn't like it.
The cop looked from Felix to Kit. Tell you what, I figured this might happen. Expected it, really. So I brought something, Felix said. Holding out his hand to Andrea, she set a sheaf of papers into his open hand. You can work for me, become an indentured servant, and continue on as a policeman. You get to keep your job and get paid for both while being in Dimitri's organization. Or I tell Dimitri you're a cop, and I get your soul anyways, and turn you into sausage. Your call.
Why not make him a slave?
Andrea asked. That'd require a lot more effort in taking him down to a government-sanctioned slave officer. Can't just force anyone to be a slave, after all. Silence took over. For 10 seconds, no one said anything. What would you have me do? Asked the cop in a soft voice. Dunno. Probably have you feed bad information to your cop pals. Make you swear to say nothing about me or my organization to anyone. Honestly, I'd probably just have you feed me info. Felix shrugged his shoulders and then dropped the contract in front of the policeman. Read it over if you like, but time's ticking. If we run out, or you say no, then we go on to the sausage option. No need to wait. I already have an answer. I'll be your damned servant. You leave me little choice. They'd go after my family if they found out.
2 children and a wife,
Kit said.
They live about an hour from here. We'll be able to protect them once you sign on.
The man blinked, staring at Kit. Felix tapped the papers in front of the cop. Read, sign, and then take this. Felix set down a pushpin next to the paper. Hook a finger, smear some blood in that circle in the corner. Voila! You'll be done after that. Contract signed and magically binding. As easy as that. Then we move right along as if nothing happened. The cop picked up the top few papers and started to scan through them. Could you give me the abbreviated version? Sure. Too long didn't read, coming up. You work for me. You discuss nothing of me or the organization with anyone outside of it. You'll be paid for your work according to market value. You'll receive health and dental benefits. You'll be enrolled in a 401k. Your family will receive a life insurance payout if you die in the line of duty. Your life cannot be spent recklessly. Contract is valid for 1 year. That's the gist of it, really. The cop frowned and squinted at Felix. That sounds very... corporate, I guess. We're a company. We are Legion. Money is our goal. The cop frowned, picked up the pen, and signed. Taking up the pushpin, he pricked his thumb. A bead of blood welled up. The cop pressed the blood droplet into the corner. With a hiss, the blood boiled away, only to leave a nasty red stain. I feel like Faust. Hardly. If you were Faust, you'd be stuck for all eternity. This is only a year, Felix said. Picking up the contract, he signed it and then handed it over to Kit. Taking the pen from him, she signed her own name at the bottom where it listed HR representative.
I'll arrange your onboarding and orientation. It'll probably be sometime next week when we have a new class starting,
Kit said, tucking the paper away. Seriously? Yep. Whatever. Time for you to go. What's your name again? Never mind. Doesn't matter. I'll probably not see you again. Your supervisor will work with you. Felix gestured to the man while making eye contact with the others. Picking the man up under the arms, they escorted him out. Dimitri sat down in the interviewee chair and looked to Kit. Well?
One thief who moonlights as an informant on occasion when he finds someone he doesn't like. That's it, though.
Kit tore out the page she had taken her notes on. Giving it a final glance, she set it down in front of Dimitri.
There's all the notes you'll need.
Huh, Dimitri said, reading over the paper. Handy. She's irreplaceable. Now, if that's taken care of, I think we'll be leaving, Felix said, standing up. Yeah. Thanks, Dimitri murmured, waving a lazy hand at them. The others left the room, leading the way. Kit, Andrea, and Felix fell in behind them, moving to the exit without another word for anyone. Hitting the street in under a minute, they started off for their convoy of cars parked nearby. Halfway to the car, something crashed into the pavement nearby. All around him, gunfire opened up as a man-shaped monster stood up. Dressed all in red, it roared and lifted its arms. In its hand was a mangled other. The head of the poor Andrea twisted all the way around and her chest flattened as if she'd been hit by a steamroller and dragged under. Bullets sank into the hulking mound of muscle with no apparent effect. Pulling the head off the dead woman, the man hurled it at a different other. The gory projectile smashed into her leg and bent it backwards with a crack. Kit, Andrea, and Felix took several steps back as the others went to work. They moved in a wolf pack formation, the one behind firing to keep the monster busy, as the ones in front kept its attention moving.
Kit, can you drop him?
Felix asked.
No, I never could get into his head when he was on my team, and I can't now.
What? Felix's question was cut off as a bloody arm zipped by his head. It had only missed because Andrea shoved him to one side, keeping him safe.
His name's Tanker. He worked with...
A lightning bolt tore free from the top of a building and hit Felix in the chest. The armor seemingly was built to take such a hit, and the lightning vanished. The boom of the thunder practically rattled Felix's teeth out of his head. Felix was pitched forward as something slammed into his back. Rolling head over heels, he fetched up behind an other and dashed off towards the convoy. Where he'd been a moment ago, there now stood a humanoid shadow with a blade, trying to fend off Andrea Prime. He could only barely make out the edges of the form, as it seemed to blend with the very shadows it resembled. Apparently, Felicia's armor really could stand up to most anything. Kit picked up the blurry wraith from the ground and levitated it into the air. Setting off at a run, Kit and Andrea joined him near the cars. The struggling shadow was slammed into the ground several times, each bone-cracking pavement slat eliciting a groan. Kit lifted the fellow and held them still. The moment the shadow twitched, she slammed them back into the ground again. There was no further movement after that. Andrea popped open the trunk while eyeing the ongoing fight with the savage monster man. Pulling out a set of jumper cables, she bounced the shadow up, then tossed it into the trunk.
We should get out of here,
Kit said.
They won't be able to hold Tanker forever, and Bolt is still out there. That still leaves...
Well, I never. If it isn't Augur. A man in a yellow and black spandex suit stood a few feet off. Even his head was covered in the material. You're looking great lately. If I did... Andrea buried the Shadow's blade in the man's gut and ripped it upwards. Intestines spilled out of the man's stomach like spaghetti pouring out of a pot. Whipping the blade back the other way, she decapitated the man, the shiny bodysuit material snapping down towards his bloody midsection as the head came free. Picking up the head, which actually rolled its eyes, she tossed it at Tinker.
Reabsorb and retreat!
Andrea called out. Getting into the driver's seat, she twisted the ignition immediately. Kit and Felix wasted no time and got in. Andrea slammed the gas before the doors had even closed and had them off like a shot. Another lightning bolt crackled to life and shattered the road in front of them. Andrea cranked the steering wheel one way, then the other, avoiding the massive ditch with a few scant centimeters to spare.
He won't be giving up that easy. We'll need to keep an eye out. He lands one and the battery's toast.
Kit just about yelled. Andrea spun the wheel and took them off down an alley. The rear quarter panel rebounded off a wall.
I texted Ioana and Miyu. They'll lock down the facility and keep watch,
Kit said, tucking her phone away. Kit, they knew you. You know them. Felix looked out the rear window as others scrambled in every direction, absorbing the dead and escaping in multiple directions.
They're former heroes, Felix. Of course I know them. I worked with them often enough. They were supposed to be there when we tried to take out Skipper.
Kit was grasping the "Oh God" handle above her, her other hand pressed to the dashboard.
You fought Skipper?
Andrea asked, skidding them out of the alley and into a street. Horns went off all around them as she nearly hit several cars as she drifted through.
I think so. Felix took my memories of the period before we ended up as slaves. One of the last memories I have is of starting to draw up plans on how to fight Skipper. It was just after they'd entered the city and started to take over.
Okay, so I've never heard who or what Skipper really is. Who is he? She? Felix tightened his seatbelt after Andrea recovered from the multi-lane skid and blew through a red light.
We don't know. We think it's a man, but we're not sure. Or at least, we weren't at the time. Maybe I should get those memories back from you soon.
Yeah, sure, whatever. Let's just get the fuck home first, yeah? Andrea drifted through another turn and wiped out a speed limit sign, the metal post snapping and going flying off behind them.
This is fun. Maybe we could do this some other time. Without the bad guys chasing us. We are the bad guys,
Kit lamented.
No, we're not. We didn't attack them. They attacked us. Didn't ask us a question or anything. Bad guys do that.
Andrea cheerfully crowed as she brought them out of the curve.
They did, didn't they?
Kit said softly. Chapter 22. Old Friends. As they sped along the streets, Felix had the distinct impression things weren't getting better. Maybe it was the shadow they'd thrown in the trunk, or the others being slaughtered, or the fact that Kit seemed nervous, or the massive, flying, angry, screaming man that landed on the roof of the car. Crumpling as if it were a soda can, the car folded in on itself. Shouting with rage, the man known as Tanker started ripping handfuls of the roof off. Andrea pulled a pistol out of somewhere and rammed the nose of it up into the man's junk, then pulled the trigger. The yelling turned into shrieking as Andrea emptied the entire clip. A massive hand came down, swatting at her, before leaping free of the ruined car. Andrea's arm was bent at an unnatural angle at the forearm. After a second, blood began pumping as the wrist and hand detached and fell free from her forearm. The massive monster had managed to tear off Andrea's lower arm in a single hit. Andrea screamed in pain, clutching to the wheel with the other hand as she kept them moving. Felix leaned over the console and reached down towards Kit's midsection. Grabbing a hold of her skirt, he yanked at it.
Felix, this isn't the time!
Shrieked Kit, her eyes wild as she looked at him. I need your belt, Felix replied. Pulling at her skirt again, he got eyes on the prize. Unbuckling it, he snatched it free of her skirt and then grabbed the stump of Andrea's arm. Looping the belt quickly around the elbow joint, he cinched it incredibly tight and looped it back around. Giving it a final jerk, he tucked the belt loop into itself. That'll hold you while I fix it. Keep going while I see if I can get your arm to grow back. Felix called up Andrea's character sheet, then dismissed it when a thought came to him. Half of Andrea's problem was she had no resiliency. Fuck it, Felix said, focusing on the idea of giving her extreme and controlled regeneration. Third power, Unlock. Directed complete regeneration. Required stamina, 70. Unmet. Required intelligence, 40. Unmet. Upgrade, 35,000. Felix immediately upgraded Andrea's stamina to 70 and her intelligence to 40, and then upgraded her with the third power. Name, Andrea Elix. Alias, Andrea, Andy, Lex. Power, multiple self-projections. Secondary power, partitioned mind. Third power, directed complete regeneration. Physical status, wounded. Mental status, concerned. Positive statuses, none. Negative statuses, bleeding. Strength, 44. Dexterity, 62. Agility, 71. Stamina, 70. Wisdom, 81. Intelligence, 40. Luck, 53. Primary power, 31. Secondary power, 79. Third power, 50. Andrea shuddered, her head dipping forward as the power opened inside her mind. She groaned, dodging a head-on collision by inches as they barreled along. Felix glanced at her right arm as he grabbed the wheel, keeping them in the right lane even if he couldn't control their speed. From the ruins of her right forearm, the bones shifted, muscle growing outward, and skin immediately covering it. In a handful of seconds, her arm was regrown and whole.
What did you do?
Andrea asked groggily, her head lolling towards him. Gave you a third power. Andrea. Andrea! I need you to focus, please. You're driving. What was left of the roof tore off suddenly and went hurtling away. A lightning bolt crackled across the street and caught Felix in the chest. The armor took the hit, but the force of it sent him careening into the back seat this time. His helmeted head clanged off the glass and shattered it. Groaning, Felix tried to move, but felt like his arms and legs were made of pudding. Nothing was responding to his commands.
Felix!
Another lightning bolt zipped by as Andrea spun the wheel end over end, sending them down a cross street. They bounced off another car and wiped out a mailbox as they went, car parts and letters filling the air. Sitting up, Felix found himself staring at Tanker at the end of the street. They herded us here. It looked like they could swerve around him. Felix's head was pounding. He couldn't tell if it was the lightning or using so many points so fast.
I can't move him. He's too heavy.
Kit called out. Brace yourself, Kit, and act as soon as you can, Felix said, calling open Kit's window. He pushed her second power all the way to 90, then focused on the idea of giving her another power. Illusions. Illusions to the point of physical manifestations. Third power. Unlocked. Illusions. Physical projections. Required intelligence, 70. Met. Required wisdom, 70. Met. Upgrade, 60,000. Felix mentally slapped at the upgrade button. Kit wavered in her seat, a hand coming up to her brow. Tanker was seconds away. Then he was sent tumbling to one side by a gigantic fist. He blew through a wall and disappeared into the interior. Blowing past at near 70 miles an hour, Felix only had the brief flash of the man Andrea had gutted and decapitated. He was covered in blood and looked fine, hiding behind a wall. Looking back, Felix saw the man lift a rifle to his shoulder. Down! Felix shouted, standing up and lifting his arms behind the heads of Kit and Andrea. Heavy rounds slammed into his back and arms, drilling him into the back of the headrests. Andrea took another turn at incredible speeds. The tires skipped and skidded across the road as their rear end swung out behind them. The car smashed into a streetlight with the fury of a wrecking ball. Unfortunately, streetlights didn't give way as much as street signs. The rear right tire exploded from the impact, the car lurching towards the left. Andrea floored it and took them into a parking garage. The wooden arm of the toll gate exploded into a shower of splinters as the car zoomed by. Felix slumped into the rear seat, feeling as if he'd been beaten with a rubber hose all over his body. Squealing around another turn, Andrea rushed up a ramp towards the second floor. Grinding and scraping filled the entire parking complex as whatever was left of the tire went flying away. Taking another ramp, Andrea bounced the car off a cement wall and then off another car. feeling a lot like the ball in a pinball machine, Felix pressed his hands to both sides of his helmet.
Sorry, handles like a bathtub on wheels right now. One more ramp? One more ramp,
Kit said, nodding her head. Andrea charged the dying vehicle up another ramp, spinning them around the turn and bouncing the rear end from wall to wall. Each crunch and impact left paint and bits of the car everywhere. She pulled them into a secluded corner next to the slotted openings that looked out over the street below. Felix hung his head, then crumpled completely into the floorboards of the back seat. Eventually, he felt hands on him, hands struggling to get him moving, or at the very least, out of the car.
Come on, Felix. Time to go. We don't want to be here when they arrive.
Yeah, Felix muttered. Trying to get to his feet, he got 2 steps before he collapsed to the cement.
Oh, can't forget. I'll get the shadow,
Andrea said. There was the pop of the car trunk and the thump of a body hitting the ground.
Over here, Andy.
There was the shriek of metal being torn, and then the clang as it was dropped to the ground.
Drop him on, then get Felix on it. Hold on tight to both of them. Not sure if this'll work, but at this point, it's our best shot.
Felix was dragged a short distance and dropped. Then Andrea was there, holding tightly to him and pressing him to the ground. Closing his eyes, Felix tried to get his brain working. Between the lightning bolt, the adrenaline wearing off, and probably spending so many points, he felt drained. The world around him jolted. Opening his eyes, Felix turned his head and saw the dead man, tanker, and what looked like a living bolt of lightning sprinting up from the ramp. The ground shuddered again, and then of all things, the ground vanished. Rather than the simple sensation of floating away, Felix realized he really was. Floating away, that is. As quickly as it had started, they were outside of the parking complex and speeding off into the sky. Looking down, he realized they were on the hood of the car. Twisting his head around the other way, he found Kit standing nearby, her arms spread out in front of her. A lightning bolt came out from the parking complex but died halfway to them as Kit continued to pour on the speed. In a couple of heartbeats, they were soaring through the sky towards home.
This is amazing,
Andrea said.
Felix boosted my power set again. Considerably so. Gave me the ability to make living illusions. Actual physical projections. He made me regenerate to the point that I think it'd be very hard to kill me. He also moved my intelligence up again,
Andrea replied.
Not sure how I feel about that. I think I might now understand some things I wish I didn't.
Slowly, hesitantly, both women started to laugh as the wind whipped by them. Felix closed his eyes and let himself drift off for a moment. They had it under control. They didn't need him right now. Jolting upright as the car hood slammed into the ground, Felix looked around. They'd touched down in the garage bay. Home sweet home. Felix sighed and slumped where he sat. It had probably only been a few minutes that he'd drifted off, but he felt better for it.
You okay?
Andrea asked. She was in front of him, bending down to meet his eyes. Yeah. Tired, but okay. Felix got to his feet, his armor creaking. Kit clapped her hands together and then stretched her back out.
That was certainly unexpected, though it definitely gives us some ideas as to who's been attacking us.
Felix reached up to pull the helmet off his head. Pulling at the locking latch under his jaw, he grunted when it came free. The fresh, cool air bathing his head reminded him of why he generally despised hats and helmets. It always felt like he was being smothered in his own sweat. And what ideas are those? Felix pulled his helmet up under his arm and looked around. Everything seemed fine. There wasn't anything going on or out of the ordinary, which meant the attack had been aimed primarily at him and no one else.
Heroes Association. Those were all heroes. Wraith here,
Kit indicated the living shadow bound at their feet,
is a hero, as was Tanker, Lizard, and Bolt.
Okay. Felix stood up. Iowana and Miyu were going to lock everything down, or so he remembered. The fact that they weren't here was a little disturbing. Maybe they're at a different location, making sure everything is secure? This would be the most likely location to get through an attack without them. The automated defenses that Felicia had been putting up were formidable. Turrets, locking bulwark doors, electrified rooms. She'd really gone for the full supervillain's hideout cliché. That means that the people we've been fighting this whole time would seem to be the Hero Association. I honestly didn't even consider it.
Oh, but I did,
said a cool voice. Looking over, he found Lily walking towards him.
Did you miss me?
She asked, walking up to Felix. Maybe. Though I think you missed teasing me more. Felix pointed to the paper she had in her hand. Got something for me?
I sure do.
Lily walked up and tapped his breastplate with a single fingertip.
I also have information. Stop flirting and tell him. I'm going to take Wraith here to the room in the meantime. Meet me there,
Kit said. She grabbed hold of one of Wraith's ankles and dragged them off. Lily sniffed delicately, then held out the paper to him.
The hearing with those lawyers was indeed a setup. The entire firm was purchased by a holding company. Tracing that company took some time. It went through a couple others, of course. But we found it went back to, surprise, the Hero Association.
Felix read over the paper, which listed out the owner of each company as it moved back up towards the real owner. Huh. Seems almost too easy, Felix muttered. He looked up from the paper to find Lily watching him with a smile.
It was. So either they're incredibly stupid and underestimated us, or they're a puppet. Oh, did I also mention someone is opening up pawn shops next door to ours at every location?
Huh? That's strange. Felix handed the paper back to Lily. Felix had noticed Andrea had been coming in closer, slowly, out of the corner of his eye. Now she wedged herself between Lily and himself. Both he and Lily looked at her with a bit of surprise.
I don't like it when you're so close to him,
Andrea said. Her voice was soft, almost to the point they couldn't hear her. Then she looked from Lily to Felix and turned a bright red. Pressing her hands to her face, she fled, her tail hanging low behind her.
What did you do?
Lily asked. She'd watched Andrea leave, but now turned her eyes back on him. I raised her intelligence. It was the only way I could give her a new power. Felix shrugged. Lily made a humming noise and tilted her head to one side.
I'll talk with her. No more upgrading people without consulting me.
Lily smacked his forehead with the rolled-up sheet of paper.
I'm your account manager, both monetary and points. Don't do things without consulting me.
Yes, dear, Felix said in a mocking voice.
Good. So long as you understand. How am I expected to balance the household income otherwise? And about our budget. We'll need to rely on you making our money for a while. These pawn shops are literally doing everything they can to drive us out of business.
Huh. What exactly are they doing? Felix set the helmet down at his feet, then reached up and started to take off his armor.
Oh, the usual. Undercut our prices, buy things for more, sell them for less. Honestly, they're probably hemorrhaging money doing it. They're definitely making more money than we are, though, since we're not making any at all. Without you backstopping our finances, we'd be out of business in a few months.
Felix frowned at that, dropping the breastplate and its undergarment to the ground. Which means they knew our finances when they concocted this plan, but not the extent of my powers. Interesting. Scratching at his bare chest, Felix thought on that. Reaching down, he pulled his boots off. I would almost think we had a rat, except for the fact that no one can discuss anything about us with anyone. Maybe I should look into upgrading the building with anti-listening measures. Lily nodded after a moment, and then leveled her paper at his chest.
You've lost weight.
Huh? Oh, yeah. Miyu and Ioana kick my ass daily, then make me work out. Felix looked down at himself as he spoke. He'd had a tummy when he'd been working. Free fast food saved money, even if it did nothing for his physique. Not eating fast food every day probably helped as well.
Get a haircut and start shaving more regularly. You're not unattractive as you are, but with a little work, you might actually get a girlfriend.
Heh. Who wants to date a slave owner and be bound by an oath to not speak of anything they saw? Nope. My social life will be even worse than it used to be, I'm afraid.
Why not date an employee, then? I'm sure there would be those who are willing.
That seems almost worse. No way to tell if they were dating me for the perks or for me. Felix reached down and got the lower portion of his armor free. After a second, he got it unlatched and stepped out of it, letting it clatter to the ground. Gah! Free! Free at last! Felix twisted himself one way, then the other, getting his spine to pop. Lily met his gaze with a smirk. She deliberately ran her eyes down along him slowly and then back up. For whatever reason, getting out of his armor had taken precedence over caring that he was only wearing boxers underneath. Now, however, standing such in front of Lily, he was forced to realize that this had not been a good idea. Lily had no interest other than provoking and prodding him, and all he'd done was give her an easy target. The fuck is wrong with me? Like something out of a terrible movie. I think I want a shower.
Is that so? We can continue this discussion in your bathroom, then.
No. That's fine. We can pick this up later. Felix turned and marched off with as much dignity as he could muster. Chapter 23. Reactionary. Felix had set himself up in the appraisal room for customers and clients. There weren't any, since everyone was going to the competing pawn shop, but he still wanted to keep to his schedule. To keep himself busy, he was going over the available upgrades and point purchases he could make. Dense materials. All exterior surfaces and materials are upgraded. Prevents listening equipment and superpowers from hearing anything inside the building. 125,000.
That sounds nice,
Andrea said. She was seated at the end of his appraisal table, working on her tablet. Definitely seems like something worth taking. Add it to the list. Andrea made a musical noise in the affirmative. Felix kept reading through the listed improvements. There were a number of them that didn't seem to be worth the cost. Stain-resistant floors, upgraded insulation, energy-efficient lights. Felix shook his head and closed the window. They'd already gone through and picked out the ones that would be useful. Can you read the list back to me?
Mm-hmm.
Andrea tapped at her tablet and then cleared her throat. She opened her mouth and then stopped. After a second, she dropped the tablet and turned her chair around to face him.
Actually, I want to ask you a favor.
Felix waited patiently. Andrea being serious was something out of the ordinary. I'm listening.
You made me smarter.
I did?
Twice.
Felix had to think about that for a moment, but he nodded his head. He had indeed moved her intelligence up previously as well.
I understand things I didn't before. Things that seem obvious to me now.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're complaining or... Andrea gave him a small smile.
Maybe I am. Well, I'd like to ask you if you can upgrade my powers.
Felix nodded his head. The request wasn't surprising. Not really. Not when he thought about it. Okay. And what do you want me to upgrade exactly?
When I take in my others, I take in all of their memories. And if they're dead, I take in their memories of their death. After a while, it can be overwhelming. All those memories of death. The pain, the suffering that comes right before. The emptiness and loneliness.
I can only imagine.
After a while, I have to create a death other. I give them all my memories of death, the pain, the horrible things that happen. Then I send them out. They normally head to places that could use a vigilante, where they can put our skills to use while trying to live with the burden we've given them.
I see.
I want you to upgrade me so that I can choose the memories I take back, that I can leave out the ones I don't want.
Andrea looked at him with wide eyes, her hands clasped in her lap, gripping each other. It explained her partitioned mind power, as well as why she seemed disturbed and happy at the same time. I'll see what I can pull up. Why don't you call Lillian while I do that? Felix turned back to the table. Focusing on her power, he tried to encapsulate everything she'd told him as part of an upgrade to her existing powers. That, and so that it didn't take as much out of her with each clone. Power upgrade. Multiple self-projections. Required primary power. 40. Unmet. Upgrade. 5,000. Power upgrade, partitioned mind. Required secondary power, 50. Met. Upgrade, 5,000. Expensive when you count in the cost of getting her up to primary power 40. Something like 45,000 points.
You rang, darling?
Felix glanced up from his power screen. Lily was perched on her elbows on his table, her face resting in her palms. Yeah. Andrea wants an upgrade to her power set. Total cost is around 45,000 points. I think it's worth the cost. As far as I can tell, there's nothing on the point calendar today either.
There isn't. And no, I don't disagree with you on the upgrade for her.
Lily's eyes flicked to the wolf girl, then back to him.
Though you'll need to upgrade Ioana, Miyu, and Felicia after this as well. It wouldn't be fair otherwise.
Felix sighed, pressing a hand to his temple. She was right, of course. Doing so much for Kit, Lily, and Andrea put him in a strange spot for the other three. Yeah, you're right.
I know I am. Your point calendar is empty tomorrow as well. We were just going to have you make gold. Our finances are doing well enough in our other investments that we can spare the points.
Lily stood up, rearranged herself, then moved to sit next to him on his left. Felix accepted the upgrade for Andrea as he turned to Miyu in the corner. Come on over, Miyu. We'll do yours next. Lily's head snapped around to where Felix had spoken to.
I want nothing,
Miyu said from the shadows. You sure? Could give you the ability to blend in with shadows. Actually become one. Miyu was silent. The spot that he thought was her shifted. Barely.
I will consider it. For now, nothing.
As you will. Felix sighed and looked to Andrea. So, was that what you wanted? Andrea gave herself a visible shake, her eyes turning to him.
Yes. Yes, it is. I'm going to go. I need to call my death others and bring them home. Those who are alive, at least.
Getting to her feet, Andrea moved to leave, her tail swishing back and forth behind her energetically. Stopping at the door, she turned to him. She gave him a bright, warm smile.
Thank you, Felix. I'll repay you.
Then she opened the door and stepped out.
My. I think she even gave me butterflies with that,
Lily whispered in Felix's ear. Flinching away from her, Felix tried to ignore her completely. With that many points spent, I'd rather keep the rest just in case. Besides, we really could use the money.
Not a bad thought. Just make sure you get back to Felicia and Ioana soon. And Miyu, too, if she figures out what she wants.
Felix could only agree. Now the rest of the day sat ahead of him. There were no appointments scheduled, which meant it'd be time to catch up on paperwork.
So, whatever shall we talk about?
Lily asked, smiling.
How about the fact that those boxers you had on the other day looked like they were 10 years old?
Felix was making the rounds today, visiting each department, asking about the few people he knew by name, trying to learn the names of a few more. Everywhere he went, he found people working hard in their various jobs and tasks. He also got a chance to really explore the layout on foot, as blueprints and maps only did so much for him. In his head, he now divided each section by 3 floors. For each section, there was one communal dining hall, a number of training rooms, classes, supply depots, section stores, armories, restrooms, kitchen, morgue, conference rooms, meeting hall, a number of break rooms, and a good number of recreation areas. Felicia had truly aimed at producing in each section everything someone could ask for in their lives. People worked shifts, were given an allowance, and could socialize freely. Nothing was restricted to them, except speaking of the organization. Outside internet connections weren't available on personal PCs. It was accessible at public computers through a VPN and firewall that scrubbed everything going out and in. Somewhere along the line, they'd picked up a rather proficient IT team. Then there was the other side of the underground world, as some had taken to calling it. The departments, with the main elevator bays acting as a central hub. Half of the section was divided into the departments. The work areas. Residential and commercial zones did not overlap. Thumbing the biometric lock to get into the R&D lab, Felix waited for the door. Mr. White had hired a team of people to work for him. all with the approval of HR and magically enforced indentured contracts. Every time he visited, which wasn't as often as he'd have liked, but probably more than he needed to, there was something new. Felicia's team shared the workspace with him, mundane engineers and supers working side by side to create the best tech for Legion. The big security door moved aside, the 3-inch thick steel ominously silent. Walking in, he found Mr. White and one of his team members fiddling with what looked for all the world like a soda can. If soda cans glowed and had circuitry that seemed to guide that glow. Felix said nothing, as he didn't want to interrupt their conversation, but instead took a seat and merely watched. The team member took the can and inserted it into a slot at the bottom of a box-like contraption. With a flick of a switch, the box started to glow and gently hum.
"Good. Take it to Felicia."
Mr. White shooed the assistant off and turned to face Felix.
"Good afternoon."
"Good afternoon, Mr. White."
"You just witnessed the first time we had a successful energy cell power up something other than itself."
"The soda can?"
"Exactly. That soda can could power everything in this building for a few hours. And with that successful test, we've now solved the problem we had with our energy weapons. There was no way to supply sufficient amount of energy to create reliable weapons. Sure, it'd fire once or twice by conventional means, but that was it."
Felix had to admit that sounded like a pretty terrible problem. Why take a weapon that can fire twice when you could take a firearm that could put hundreds of rounds downrange easily and still fire more?
"We should have a working prototype in a week. Felicia built a machine that creates those soda cans. Works off a similar principle to how Lily charges things, I guess."
"Makes sense. And yeah, that sounds like Felicia. Anything she can think up, she can probably build. Provided she can think it up." Felix held out one hand towards Mr. White. "How goes the progress with the—" A deep rumbling brought Felix up short. He could even feel it on his body. This particular lab was rather far below surface level, which meant whatever had just happened was huge. Then the emergency lights started flashing, and a low buzzing could be heard.
"We're under attack,"
Mr. White said, looking up at one of the flashing lights. "Take your position, then." Felix moved over to the security door and thumbed it open. He'd be needed in central control. Being able to repair anyone, or anything, from anywhere in the building made him invaluable. But he had to see what was going on. Another deep rumble overtook him. It was louder this time. Did they fucking nuke us? Setting off at a run, Felix felt like he couldn't get there quick enough. 8 soldiers, as they couldn't have been anything else in the gear they were wearing, in front of the vault door for Central Command and Security, saw him coming. They were armed in what looked as if a modern-day soldier had gone through a science fiction novel. Each was armed with a machine gun that was mounted to an exo-frame that was issued to the elite forces in Legion. The weapons were belt-fed from a backpack that hung off the back of the exo-frame. Their tactical gear had the feel of blast gear that didn't seem to encumber them at all. Their helmets were the stuff out of comic books. Much like the rest of their armor, it was dark, sleek, metallic. An eyepiece over one side of the dark black visor added to the strange look of it. He'd seen these soldiers training with Andrea and Ioana. He knew they were superior in many ways. Quick, strong, determined, intelligent. Those exo-frames weren't a joke either, and could power them along as fast as an Olympic sprinter for as long as they had power. They could lift things far beyond their capacity as a normal human. Those frames put them on a level with low-powered supers. Each of the 50 exo-frames they possessed had been created by Felicia's team by hand. They weren't able to be mass-produced yet, as the energy source required hadn't been available. That, and it was inefficient as hell. They ate up power. They were only good for 3 hours before needing to get recharged. Until a few minutes ago, that is. Mr. White solved that problem. The gigantic vault door began to unlock itself and hiss as Felix got closer. By the time he was close enough to enter, it was already closing itself again. Felix slipped inside as it clanged shut behind him, the massive locks engaging and closing them in. Andrea Prime, Kit, and Miu were present in the room, as well as the command center crew. "What the hell is going on?" Felix asked, moving to his captain's chair in the room. It was center stage in the middle of the massive wall display of cameras, feeds, and information.
"They bombed the building,"
Andrea said, coming up beside him.
Twice. No deaths, but a lot of wounded. Felicia's machines are patching them up so they'll live, but you'll need to spend points to get them back to full capacity.
Felix grunted at that. Of course. It's part of my duty to them. Did we engage our telemedics? Kit came up to stand on his left.
We did. They worked splendidly. We had a full triage and medical evacuation within 20 seconds of the blast. They're the reason we have no casualties.
Perfect. The telemedics had been a late-night thought of his own. He had kept giving superpowers to those who already had them. He'd never stopped to think about giving powers to those who had none. Putting out a call to those who, 1, wanted to be on the medical staff, and 2, wanted to receive a superpower to do that job, they'd gotten a large number of volunteers. Each volunteer had been granted the power of teleportation for themselves and whoever they were touching. Then he'd given them a miscellaneous power, as he'd called it. They were all given the gift of a full education in medicine in the span of an hour. As much of an education as you could get going through medical school, that is. It was a strange superpower to give out, the knowledge of medicine and health. Pretty much like a damn skill book out of a video game, a superpower granted by virtue of what was contained between the covers. No one complained about suddenly being the equivalent of a medical doctor from it. Finally, each was given a power cell from Lily and told to activate it when they were in danger. It would activate a shield for about 30 seconds that would keep them from harm. They weren't issued weapons, though, as their primary function was to get in and get out. And thus the telemedic team was born. A group of 20 men and women given superpowers specifically to operate in a single function. They'd practiced extensively, but had had no actual experience until today. "What else do I need to know?" Felix asked. Several of the cameras at the entrance and the front lobby were down.
They've taken up position and are sieging us. There's been nothing on any police, firemen, or government frequencies. Lily is pretty sure a blackout has been purchased, as she can't even reach her contacts.
Kit closed up her tablet and tucked it under her arm. I see. Who's leading the defense?
Ioana and Lily. They're working on shoring up defenses as well as probing at the attackers. Some of the telemedics are taking it on themselves to snag wounded enemy combatants. They're being dropped off with Andrea's guests.
Guests? Felix asked, turning his head to Andrea.
My Death Others. They all came in today. We're going to reabsorb them back into ourselves. Welcome them home. They've been gone a long while. Some died, but most lived.
Death Others,
Kit said, not really understanding.
I had to fill an other up with all of our deaths, and then send them out into the world. So many deaths piled up hurt us. We had to do it more frequently when we worked.
Right. I take it your Death Others greet these wounded enemies with smiles and cookies?
They're questioning them. Ask them to sign an indentured contract, then feed them into the sausage machine if they decline. Alive.
Oh. They sound like they'd be great to have a game of Risk with. Let's go have a chat with them when this is over.
When this is over?
Kit inquired. It's not like we didn't plan for this. Felix tapped the communication button on his display next to his chair. Then he hit the drop-down list and selected the R&D lab. Mr. White, Felicia, I need the wardens.
Sending them up as soon as we're able. We put them through a series of trials earlier, and they're still charging,
came back the response. He wasn't sure who it was, but it didn't matter. Felix held in a sigh. He didn't need the wardens right now, but he wanted to use them.
Wardens?
Miyu asked from directly behind him. Wardens. I'd tell you what they are, but why spoil the surprise? You were welcome to come with me when I was doing the department goal setting and those damned individual development plans the other week. This all came up then.
I had enough of those tasks when we went through my own department.
Miyu had been nonplussed with the corporate mandates he kept laying out. Andrea? Asked the Beastkin, turning her head to him. I could really go for some pancakes. Did you get that tiny kitchen set up in here?
Pancakes!
Shouted the Beastkin, who scampered off to a corner.
You spoil her,
Kit muttered. That I do. Chapter 24. Escalation. The smell of pancakes cooking filled the room as everyone watched the screens. His people held the security hall as it was intended to be used, a narrow choke point with overlapping fields of fire. The enemy had taken the lobby and were attempting to do the same thing further in. Except that there was no cover, and there were murder holes from reinforced security boxes that lined the lobby. It left their would-be attackers just barely inside the lobby, and his own people at the end of the security hall, and in the kill rooms. Occasionally, one side or the other would put some lead down the security hallway or through the lobby. "They've already lost 20 or so people. Most of those were in the initial push," said one of the techs at a terminal. "We've got about 40 wounded. All satellite locations have reported in and are in their bunkers. Everyone is accounted for." "Outstanding," Felix said around a grin. Leaning forward over his display, he pulled up the overhead map and centered it over the security hall. "They've disabled all the cameras they can reach, so we've got nothing on the outside. Initial reports are that there is only minor damage outside of the lobby, though." The tech who was speaking fed an overlay to the map Felix was looking at, marking off broken cameras, problems, and assumed positions. "That was where the bombs went off? The lobby?" Felix looked up to the monitors on the wall. The lobby was charred, smoking, and full of fragments of people and objects. "Both of them. Yes, sir." The tech dropped the conversation and turned to the tech closest to him and started up a different conversation. Something blurred across the video feed in the lobby. That same blur burst down the security hall, then stopped dead in its tracks in the center of the staging area at the end of the security hall. It was a man in a dark spandex suit. He'd been picked up off the ground and was suspended in midair. He rotated slowly in one direction as his legs pumped furiously at the air. One of Felicia's tricks, he guessed. He wasn't sure what it was set up for, but it seemed as if its goal was to take whoever stepped on it and hold them in the air for a time. One of the ceiling tiles shifted, and a 2-inch-long rod stuck out from the crack. It segmented itself and then extended rapidly, plunging a circular tip into the man's back. Electricity crackled from the end of it, discharging straight into the man. His mouth sprang open soundlessly as the room flickered and flashed. "Do you want the audio feed, sir?" asked one of the techs. "To what? Hear him scream? No thanks, I'm not that twisted." The electrical current cut off as abruptly as it started. The man hung limply, the only sign of life, his eyes rolling around wildly in his head. Retracting into itself, the segmented electric rod disappeared. The floor rippled now, a number of floor plates sliding around. Then the man fell. He vanished into the open ground and was no more. "I kind of feel like a Bond villain. I just need a cat sitting in my lap. I could scratch their ears while I chuckle at the fact that a superhero just fell into a damn pit trap." "This is so cliché it hurts," Felix said, shaking his head.
Clichés tend to be founded in reality.
Kit sighed and opened up a different screen on one of the unused monitors.
"I believe Miyu told you this previously. Did she not?"
On that monitor was the appropriately named sausage room. It was only accessible by the main elevator, and it was rather deep down. If he had to guess, Felicia had put it roughly 100 floors below. Surprised he didn't go splat when he reached the bottom. The man who had fallen through the floor was being strung up by his arms and legs by darkly dressed Andreas. The Death Others. They worked efficiently, coldly. A man in a chair was being questioned, while a different woman was sitting in front of a desk with what could only be an indentured contract in front of her. A cart was brought in by a normal other, dressed in the standard Legion uniform the others had adopted. Moving quickly to the sausage machine, she started pulling down the long ropes of what used to be a human. Once the cart was loaded up, she happily waved at the Death Others and left. The woman at the table signed the form and then laid her head down on the desk and started crying. Lovely. Yep, Bond villain. Andrea happily dropped a plate of pancakes into his lap and handed him a fork.
"Pancakes!"
Tanker appeared in the lobby, running dreadfully slow.
"Looks like the speedster was the one who was supposed to soften things up."
Kit tapped at her tablet and focused one of the cameras on Tanker. He trundled along as bullets slammed into him continuously. Even Tanker couldn't take that kind of punishment without injury. His arms came up to protect his face as he stomped along. Bouncing off a wall, he stumbled into the security hall and kept moving. When he came out into the open area that the speedster had been trapped in, Tanker veered off to the left blindly. Oh, he missed the pit trap. Felix took a mouthful of pancakes and watched as Tanker closed in on a barricade full of his people. A squad of supers stepped out of the barricade and surrounded Tanker. Off to one side of the camera, Felix could see Lily and Ioana supervising. Must be trying to give the newbies a taste of actual combat. Considering the telemedics, it's not a terrible idea. A woman with a thin sword stepped forward and blasted a lightning-fast thrust into Tanker's side. The sword skittered across his skin, drawing a line of blood, but nothing else. The swordswoman danced away as Tanker's arms came out, trying to grab her. One of her partners stepped in and unleashed a flurry of kicks into Tanker's knees and thighs. As soon as the big, nigh-invulnerable hero turned, Eva's brother Evan stepped up and laid his hands on Tanker's back. Lightning coursed through the hero at a level that could probably power an entire city. Tanker arched his back, his body stiffening under the onslaught. Evan kept using the man as a grounding wire before he finally took 2 steps back, falling to one knee. Lily waved a hand at the young man, and he was dragged backward out of the combat area by a burst of rune script. Tanker started to fall over, his body still locked in an upright position from the shock. Then he somehow managed to take a few stumbling steps backwards. The swordswoman stepped in again, her blade dancing out into Tanker's face. Once, twice, thrice. Then she was gone again before Tanker could react. Turning, Tanker started to flee towards the security hall. Apparently, that was a signal, as Ioana and Lily stepped in at that point. Lily smashed Tanker to the ground with an explosive concussion. Ioana casually walked up to the man and started kicking him in the head repeatedly. 10 kicks in, and Tanker